So hello and welcome to another segment of Intersections Policy Program and Practice Exchange. My name is Elisa Gwilliam, and today I have the pleasure to be talking to Executive Director of Mental Health America of Dutchess, Andrew O'Grady, and Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center of Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary College, and co-founder of NOAR, the National Organization of Adult Addiction and Recovery, Dr. Larry Force. And our special guest today is Kay-Liz Oates, who's going to be leading our conversation on going beyond words and looking at recovery in a spiritual way. So Andrew, do you want to get us started today?
Yeah, this is session 14, and this is fantastic. We've had some great guests, and this one will be no different. Got to talk to Kay-Liz a little bit before we started, and I'm already impressed, and I think she's a remarkable person. So looking forward to hearing from her as we go on. I was thinking as we were talking before we started recording that these episodes or webcasts, however you want to call them, sessions, are perfect educational tools. We have a homeless day shelter that's located in Poughkeepsie. It's a 24-hour shelter, and there are large televisions, and we like to provide educational videos. And there's no reason these can't be those educational videos. We are adding expertise from all over the country to these webcasts. We've had people in recovery. We've had policymakers. We just have had people from various backgrounds. And today, Larry will introduce our guests, but we're going to be bringing in a spiritual piece to this whole thing. You know, not every single person that goes and attains recovery is somebody that it's not a cookie cutter situation. Everything's different. You know, not everybody does it the same way. And while AA might work for one person, it doesn't work for another. And spirituality may work for one group and not another. But there's all sorts of options. So when I say I like to show these videos at our homeless day shelter, there are many people there struggling with addiction. And the more I can put in front of them about various opportunities and options for getting clean and supporting that lifestyle is what's important, because it's going to grab, something's going to grab a different person a different way. So I'm just real excited about today. And my friend Larry Force Dr. Larry Force will now discuss this. He won't discuss his tie. It's a beautiful tie, but he's going to introduce our guest.
I love this tie, and I will discuss this tie. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Alyssa. It really is an honor to have our guest join us today. Dr. Elizabeth Oakes, I'd like to just read a little bit here, and the reality is I could read for hours of the work that she's has completed and that she's in process of doing. But here's a little blurb. Dr. Elizabeth Kay-Liz, as she goes by, Oakes, is a published author and a retired associate professor of clinical pastoral counseling with a broad background in executive business management, professional development training, addiction recovery counseling, and public administration. She has previous experience as a member on several governing and advisory boards. Presently, she's the owner of an online course and co-leader of a podcast. Kay-Liz, it is a real honor to have you here today. As we talked about offline, you see what we're looking to do, elevate the voice of addiction and recovery to a national level. As Andrew said, you know, it's for everyone because of the fact that addiction as itself knows no boundaries. It's not bound by socioeconomic status. It's not bound by educational level. It's not bound by somebody that might consider themselves a good person, a bad person. Addiction is something that is out there and unfortunately is available to all of us. And when I say available, you know, we talked offline and you talked about having a failed relationship at one point, not interpersonal, but you talked about the use of alcohol. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you, and the overarching question is, how did you arrive here? Not today, but this point in your life.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Alyssa and Andy. I'm very honored and humbled to be a part of this panel today. To address Larry's question, Dr. Force's question directly, how did I arrive here at this point? Since the emphasis is on spirituality, I'll say this in one phrase: by the grace of God. It's important to know that my journey from being a successful businesswoman, a housewife and mother, and now a retired writer, is that my journey into alcoholism and into recovery was a defining process for me. It gave me a deep insight of what it means to be human in this life. In terms of my relationship with alcohol, but at the worst of it, I was drinking a half a fifth of vodka every day. And and my encounter with it was one in which I did not understand it. I was living in a penthouse in Puerto Rico. We were quite successful. And the thing that when I look back on it, at a time when there was this question that rose in my mind that said, given everything that I had achieved and with myself and with my husband of the time, is this all there is? And in retrospect now, and looking back on that question, I find that it is a soul inquiry that's profound. And any individual who begins to question what existence really means, that it's an encounter with the soul, and it's a deeply spiritual question. And so that propelled me on my journey. The first of, though, after I asked that question of myself, that's when I fell into abusing alcohol, because there was nothing more I could achieve or do or strive or be ambitious about. And I felt all alone and without meaning in life. And so alcohol was right there saying, here, I got something for you, try this. And it quickly became an abusive relationship. But then I found that as I got deeper into that, I struggled with it the whole time. This is not who I am. This is not what I want to do. This is not the kind of way I want to live. Those questions kept hounding me. And finally, one time when I was reaching for the alcohol and said, I don't want to do this anymore, fell to my knees to the floor, crying. And it's at that moment that I felt my higher power crying with me. And it was at that moment that I knew I was not alone. I
have to say, that is such a powerful and profound statement. You know, one of the things that we hear a lot in the addiction world and in the recovery path is this idea of being spiritually bankrupt.
Yes.
You know, you and I have met in different arenas, and I've always been taken how your lead presence is spiritual. But here you sit here today saying at some point it wasn't that.
That's right.
You know, and by the grace of God, you know, you now stand here in front of a national audience talking about the fact that it was in my darkest moments that became the opportunity for change.
That's right. That's exactly right, Larry. And for me, going deeper into the study of what I went through and what that process was about, I find that that it is in our darkest moments that we turn around inside ourselves and ask, who am I and what am I doing? The addicted people that I worked with in my counseling practice always have that question. How is it that I got here? Why am I doing this? And how am I caught up in it? And finally, the realization comes that there is something more in me, as William James, who is one of the founding fathers of psychology, would say, that the alcoholic, the addict, when they realize that there's something higher and above them that they can reach and hang on to, even if they feel all their lower being is going to pieces in the wreck, then that is the saving grace that comes into the light, that comes into the darkness, that helps the alcoholic, the addict, to begin to reach for help and support. For me, I've gone deeper into my spiritual path, and I could, talk for hours on that, and I won't here. But the thing is that just to summarize it, that this powerful presence of spirituality within me has helped me to understand where I am, who I am, and what I am doing. And that was the question that I had at the beginning of my addiction, and the recovery process that I've gone through has helped me to answer that question. And for me now, in retirement, and having time to go deeper into this message and this experience, the actual spiritual presence that I understand is beneath all of who we are, this planet, this world, family, me and my space, is profound. Sometimes I say to my partner, who is also in recovery, that, Michael, I look at a grape now and I'm astounded at the miracle of it before I eat it. It's just that if once we get into recovery and really get in touch with our soul, if you want to call it that, with our higher power, if you want to call it that, with God, if you want to call it that, with absolute cause, with the universe, any name that you want to give spirituality, it's an example of finding the time to understand that we are far more than who we think we are. And that there's a power right behind us, in us, and through us that's waiting for us to give it that recognition. And once we engage, and once I engaged it and went into a deeper study, that's how I ended up in pastoral counseling, is that it was always there, even in the darkest place, at that moment in time when I'm crying in desperation, saying I can't go on with this. There is this sense of intimate companionship that I realize now that has always been there, even during my darkest time. And now my life is full of light. I feel like I'm contributing more to the world, and that I am evolving and growing up. There is a saying in the recovery rooms where they say the 12-step conversion process. And of course, what I'm describing is a conversion process. And there's a whole realm of study on what conversion is. But there is this process through which we can capture the 12 steps in this short statement. The first 3 steps is to give up. And it's not to give up to resign, but it's a surrender, that letting go. At that point in time in my own life, when I hit the floor in desperation, that was the sign of saying, I can't do this anymore. And it's the example of the first step in AA. The next 3 steps are the own up. First give up, then own up. That's the confession state. And in most world religions, there is this practice, spiritual practice of saying, I did this wrong, or I don't understand it this way. I don't understand it. This is wrong, or I'm bad, or I don't, all the negative stuff that we get involved with in understanding ourselves. The self-criticalness that characterized my addictive years is just phenomenal. That if I were to talk to myself back then, I could do nothing right. With all of my success, I could do nothing right. And again, that's tied to developmental history and how I grew up, but still, that's what's in my mind. So there is the give up of the 12 steps. There's the own up part, and then there's the make up. Now you have to seek forgiveness. Seek forgiveness as well as accept forgiveness. And certainly I went through that process as well. And forgiveness is, as we all know now, is not so much forgiving the other person, but this forgiveness is freeing yourself up. That if there is a sense of forgiving the other person, or them forgiving you, that's letting go of something that's you hold inside that's a burden and that contributes to the addictive behaviors. And then lastly is the grow up part. The last 3 steps of the 12-step process is the grow up. Give up, own up, make up, grow up. And that grow up is then the service part, and the continually monitoring the way I think, the way I feel, and confronting it when I know that it's a negative way or pattern of thinking and behaving. And the service, like here, what I'm doing now, and especially through the book now that I'm writing about wisdom's journey, because now in retrospect, I see that all through my life, all that I've done, everything that I wanted to do, I've done, and now I'm doing the thing I've always wanted to do, and that's writing, is that there is a method and reason for it all, and the journey is wisdom. And for me, when I write about how I understand who we are and where we are and how we got here and where we're going, that there is this sense in me, this higher consciousness in me that writes through me with a perspective and a knowledge that I didn't even know I had, but that the experiences that I had in my life helped me to get connected with that part of myself. And now, thank God, thank grace, thank the universe, I'm doing what I most wanted to do in my life.
That's fantastic. I listened to you, and I think of the word appreciation, and you said you started appreciating the things around you, even the smallest little things. And I guess you have to appreciate yourself first, and that comes with sobriety. I recently watched a show called The Umbrella Academy. It's on Netflix, and one of the characters in the show, they all have these quasi superheroes powers, and one of the characters was a brother who could talk to and communicate with the dead, but he would drink constantly and drug constantly because it numbed it and it didn't allow that power to come through. And you could equate that to spirituality. So I think there was probably a metaphor there with the people that wrote it. But when he got clean and he got sober and he started to appreciate what he could do, that was more clarity for him, and it worked to his advantage. And I think you spell out very clearly, what happens when you get clean. You go through those steps and you start appreciating more. It's beautiful.
Yes,
that give up process when you look back on it, because one of the things we talk about in our field is that relapse is part of the recovery process. People relapse unless they stay focused and stay in tune. But that give up, those multiple conversations you had with yourself, the eyebrows of family members or colleagues saying, what's going on? How long of a period would you say that was? That you knew that something wasn't going the way you wanted it to go? Because as we talk about the issue of recovery, no one has ever come to any of our tables and said, I knew that I wanted to drink addictively. I wanted to drink out of control. It's a slow, insidious process. But for you, when did that start, like, uh-oh, or maybe I shouldn't be doing this, even though you continue to do it?
Yes, it's, I think for me, there was this sort of observer in the back of my mind. I think we talk about that in psychotherapy, about getting in touch with the observer in our consciousness. That sort of tracked me the whole time. I saw it when I started drinking a whole flask of wine at night. I said, I shouldn't be doing this. I would say that to myself, but I did it anyway. And that's the story of most alcoholics. You have this sense, there's something in us that says, this is not right. And yet we can't continue to do it because of the behavioral, during the time, the behavioral relief that we get. We're not, for me, I didn't have the voices in my head always being critical. It was a way, it was an escape. It was a way to just zone out from all the negativity in my life. And that's why alcohol and drugs are also called spirits, because they're negative spirits, but they give a short-term relief from engaging life at the level that we need to. To answer your question more specifically, Larry, is that I had that voice in my head from the very beginning, but I did it anyway. And I think that's the story that most addicts will say as well. Even though my conscience was telling me, and this is related to the the book I'm writing, when I talk about of human nature, the 4 aspects about human nature, when we as from the very beginning go against this sense of this conscious in us, it tells us no, not to do that. So I ignored it, and it wasn't until I got to the point where I was, as I said, got to the point where I was drinking half a fifth of vodka a day, and I remember going up to the refrigerator and saying, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to. I see that vodka in the refrigerator, but I'm not going to drink it. I'm not going to do this. And when I'm opening up the door and the vodka is sitting there, and my hands go right to it, and I hear this demonic laugh in my head, and I knew I was lost. And it was at that point in time that I felt like I had no control over it. I remember playing tennis with a friend, and in denial still, because I knew I was drinking and using alcohol badly. I was playing tennis with a friend, and we'd finished, and she'd gone off, and then I had this smell. I said, "Gosh, who's that drunk around here?" Because the smell of alcohol is bad, and I realized it was me. And so several months, continuing on until I got to that point that I've described already, where I said, I can't do this anymore, where the consciousness stood up in me and spoke through me and said, I cannot do this anymore. And I surrendered, I let go. And that's when Spirit came in and helped me to find the rooms. So I had essentially I had returned to the workforce, so I wasn't drinking like I used to, but I had got my life partner now, who is in recovery, took me to an AA meeting, and I knew I had found my group. And so that's why I am proudly and very much engaged with the AA 12-step recovery method. Did my dissertation study on it in pastoral counseling, and found that this is a model that if it were to happen, and if it could happen, the whole world could use. We certainly could use it in Congress right now.
That's for sure. I'm curious. I'd like to ask you. I feel blessed that I'm able to teach this year on a graduate level, and I hadn't done that before. And it's interesting, and the perspectives of the students is very interesting. And you're teaching social work, so you have people in there who are in recovery and have gone through their battles with things, and are come out the other side. And one woman, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, 30 years in practice, my focus wasn't always on addiction. It was mainly on the mental health side. And I talk about these silos all the time. But this woman brought up a really good point. She said that, you have to, one thing that's not brought up enough in recovery is the grieving process. Because you're losing your best friend. The person, the thing that you can turn to whenever you needed to was always there to bring you to wherever you needed to be at that moment. Alcohol did that, or drugs did that, and to give it up is obviously not easy, or there wouldn't be programs around it. But you have to give up your best friend and say goodbye to that best friend, and that's a grieving process. And people don't talk. I don't hear that talked about that much. The grieving process. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've heard that before as well, that folks who understood their lives through the lens of alcohol find it very difficult to let it go. And in the letting go, there is a grieving process. And the word is used, my best friend, because if I could, and to go out into life without a drink was like committing suicide. And there, for me, as I understand it, there are 2 different levels of conversion. The founder of AA, Bill W., had a dramatic conversion where he, when it happened to him, he came out of that without any urge or regret or grief about drinking again. But then there are others that have to go through what we call educational conversion. So it's that, and that addresses the grieving process. Through your therapist, through your AA sponsors, through the study and reading, to the idea of reflection, and I love what Larry's project does with mindfulness and meditation. that these are all spiritual steps that helps with the grieving process. But yeah, it is. It really is a friend. I hate to say it this way, an evil friend, but a friend nonetheless. And
right.
and the waking up, the recognizing that it's more of an evil friend than a good friend is the conversionary process that has to happen.
Yeah.
You know, Andrew always talks about the silos. Alyssa, would you be able to bring that up, that picture? So we have this picture, and I think it really symbolizes what we're looking to promote. And what it is, it's a picture of a main building of a psychiatric center in Dutchess County that's being torn down because that's the way treatment was delivered, you know, 80, 90 years ago. You know, people were isolated, typically away from the metropolitan area. Communities were developed, and these types of settings, which were considered to be appropriate at that time, but are no longer considered to be appropriate, thank God, are being torn down. And as you can see at the bottom, it says mental health at its best, the tearing down of walls. Because too often, the silo of addiction is separated from the silo of mental wellness or mental health, or mental wellness as it's now called. Alyssa, could you bring up the other picture? The other picture I'll let Andrew describe because it's not a tearing down, it's a blending together. And Andrew, once the picture comes up, if you could provide somewhat of a history to this, because it really shows this conversion, not only personal, but also institutional in the way that we think about recovery, the way that we think about addictions, and how we go, you know, about our treatment interventions. And Andrew, could you give some history to that, Bell?
Yeah, the founder of MHAs throughout the country, very similar to Bill W. in a lot of ways, was suffering from depression around the same time, ended up in a state hospital. And back then it was you come in the door, they locked the door, and treatment was horrible. They did the best they could at the time, the best they knew they could do at the time, but it was horrible. It was shackles and chains, and the treatment was barbaric. And when he finally got out, and it took him months and months to get out, he founded MHAs throughout the country, and he called for all the shackles and chains to be sent to him. And he forged this bell from them, and on the inscription on the bell is something to the effect of, toss these shackles and chains away, and let's look for a more humane approach to the treatment of mental health and addiction. And so they ring this bell every year at our national conference, and it's a great symbol of where we've come. And I think that, you know, it's almost time for us to do, you know, maybe another big change, because, you know, the system that we all work in, that we're all proud of to some degree, has a lot of flaws. And some of those flaws are the silos of, you know, you got addiction, and you got mental health, and you got the developmental disabilities, and you got health, and they're all in their little silos, and nobody communicates with each other. And, you know, we just have to treat people as a whole person and look at everything. So I think that's you know, that's what that bell represents. And I think it's important that, you know, we sit back and look at everything and see where we are, because you know, like I said before and earlier in this presentation, everybody is a different person. Everybody has a different thing that's going to bring them to health. And so, you know, we have to draw from all angles. And what you're describing today is beautiful, and it brings a whole new, you know, idea to people who may be struggling with, what do I do and how do I get there? How do I get to a place where my life is better? And they don't want to live the way they're living anymore. But like our previous guest said, it wasn't for her, you know, I don't want to live the way I'm living anymore. For her, it was, I want to live better. I want to be who I know I can be. Big difference, as Larry pointed out, between I don't want to do this anymore to I want to be this. And everybody takes a different path to get there. But that's why these discussions are so powerful and great.
And let me ask you something, which I already know the answer for, but I want to hear it from your perspective. Do you think you could have done this alone? Do you think you could have moved from the path of addiction to the path of recovery alone?
No, it's basically no. It's just impossible. What I'm understanding about human nature is that we have been designed to be in relationship with each other, and that the very quality of relating can be the healing force. In fact, it was my being alone that brought the temptation of alcohol into my life. But the idea of trying to do this, it's just, I guess, no, I don't guess, I know it's impossible to get into recovery, get rid of the compulsive nature, the addictive behavior that defines my life by myself. If anything, it's the humbling process of recovery that opens me up, that opens up people in recovery to the realizations that they can't do life alone. Other than being a spiritual adept or monastic, or those who are far beyond us in their spiritual consciousness. And even then, they're not alone because they're in direct communion with a higher force. So no, aloneness is alien. It's not part of human makeup and who we are. And the sooner we're able to understand that, the unfortunate thing in my own study of myself and in the study of human behavior is that one of the reasons that we fall into addiction and find it so hard to get out of is this basic flaw in human nature called self-centeredness. And so that delusion, that lie that we tell ourselves about being self-sufficient, can do everything on ourselves, and that we don't need anybody, is that flaw called self-centeredness. And that's what we have to break through in order to understand that I am part of the human race. I need it and it needs me.
You know, in the conversations that we've had, you know, we're all living in a different world now with COVID. And conversations that we've had, we've talked about addiction can be a lonely path, and it can be amplified, the loneliness, as a result of, you know, the new mannerisms, the new isolation. And I said something to somebody about recovery, you know, and he stopped me. He said, no, addiction is isolation. Recovery is not in isolation, because recovery is done within a variety of ways. You know, there are multiple doors in order to enter the world of recovery. But the one that you're representing today talks about the significant word of fellowship, that you need not do this alone. And I think that we've been able to clearly show that even under these conditions, the use of technology, the idea of being able to bring a technological platform that we can touch people, not only the person that lives next door to us or lives in our community or our state, but nationwide. I guess the summary question that I would have for you is, what advice would you give someone who is where you were, who is looking around, realizing, you know, that inner critic, that there's nobody that says things to us more than we say, negative things more than we say to ourselves. We would never allow anybody to, you know, say the things that we say to ourselves. So at some moment, you started to talk differently to yourself. You thought that you were worth the value of the life that you hadn't captured at that point. What advice would you give to somebody who is wrestling with this, or a family member? Because we know that families have a tendency at times to get better slower. The person goes into rehab, they feel great. But I also know somebody that I could bring to the table, and he'd be very proud of this. He's been in 15 rehabs. He's now sober 20 years, but those other 14 times, he burnt a lot of bridges along the way. And families were like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, he's going to try it again. Well, he did try it again, and that time he got it. So what would be the advice that you would have for someone who is, they know, as you say, your internal body, your system, your mind, you know that something's not right. You don't want to live like this. What would you encourage them to do or think or act?
Well, in the context that the human receptivity to change falls along a continuum, depending on the level of belief that people have about what is meaningful to them. One of the things that I do in my research is looking at the idea of how much does purpose in life contribute to a person's length of sobriety. And one of the things I discovered was that there are two distinct meanings. There's purpose in life and meaning in life. And purpose in life is having some sense of being important in the world. That this being that I am is here for a reason, and I have to find it. And so helping, I work with folks who would suffer from sex addiction, and helping them to find out the value of who they are, beginning to help them to see that even the most egregious behavior is redeemable if you go through the conversion process of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and letting go of thinking I am in charge of myself, and understanding that there is a higher source that is available and waiting for the me that I did to turn around and to see it and to believe in it. And you believe in it by doing the thing that we're talking about, connecting with other folks who are on the path as well. But that in that moment to say to the person, you are valuable, you have meaning, and it's your responsibility to find out what you're supposed to do and contribute to this life that you have. Regardless of the scars and the wounds, all of that will heal in time. But for now, to come to terms with the fact that you have value and that were made to contribute value to this life.
Wonderful. Well, look, we had a goal in mind, and you've exceeded that goal, truly exceeded that goal. So Andrew, if there aren't any other additional summary questions or observations, we'll turn it back to Alyssa. But Kaylee, one of the things that Alyssa is going to ask you is your contact information. But not only how to contact you, but maybe you could just give a quick summary upon Alyssa's question about your podcast and the things that you're doing with that. So Andrew, any additional thoughts?
I just think it's wonderful. I just found myself just leaning in, just listening intently. You're a wonderful person to listen to and talk to. Thank you for joining us.
I am so honored. Thank you so much.
Alyssa?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kayliz. That was actually inspiring. And I know a lot of comments and stuff will be coming in. And wanted to give you the opportunity right now to tell us a little bit about where we can find your book and your podcast.
Okay, the podcast, the most direct to any of the things that I've contributed during this time is to Google me at K. Elizabeth Oaks, PhD. And all the stuff that pretty much is out there is there. The books that I published are on Amazon, and the podcast is on Anchor. And the podcast is an interesting thing. I'm doing it with my life partner who's also in recovery. And we're just going back and looking more deeply in the things that I've just talked about here. And the online course examines the 4 aspects of human nature that I've learned through my wisdom journey through this life. We start out innocent. We have the will, purpose, and the purposeful nature, the will that takes us through life. And then we have to, through the process of recovery, discover the truth, the essence of truth in us, as well as the bottom foundational that infuses everything, the essence of love that is in us. And those 4 aspects are the things that I've understood through my wisdom journey that propels the human the human being through life if we can understand what it is. So again, just Googling my name, K period Elizabeth Oakes, Oakes, PhD, and much of the stuff will come up.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you for having me.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Intersections Policy Program and Practice Exchange. If you want to hear this program again, share it with friends, or even leave a comment. You can do so by logging on to the Digital Resource Center on our website, www.intersections-exchange.org. There you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We hope you would join us next week